Wookie from Mandala Studios. Welcome to the workshop. In today's video we're going to show you how we made a werewolf mask. This one's making the fur hood, starting off with the pattening. So we got our mask from on the head, and we're going to start to rough out where we want the fur position to go. We start off with a bit of chalk. We're just going to start to eyeball in where we want that fur to come up onto the face from the hood. Then once we've got it where we want it, we just mark it in with a pen. Because we're going over this with some thick fur, we don't need to worry about it being seen, so Sharpie is fine. If we were doing something thinner and finer, or we were going to hand punch the hairline, we would do something with just thinner chalk. Next we get some thin calico fabric, and we're going to drape the pattern, or stamp modelling, depending what you call it. So to do that, we want to just start to work out where we're going to put panels of fabric. If you noticed, I put a mark on the top of the head. That's because we're going to run a central piece down, then a couple of side pieces, and then you see a single piece at the bottom. So we just lay it on to start with, and we're going to pin it down the centre, and that's going to give us a centre line to work with. We take that up to the front. You can see we just pin it and pull it around, starting to see where it goes. If you see, we're just ignoring the folds in the fabric where Esther's pulling it through. It won't matter by the time it's in fur. We could put little darts out, but we know it's not going to matter. So we just neaten up that line, mark on our fronts and backs and folds, and cut it out. A bit of a seam allowance so that we can pin it together onto the mask so we know where we're going. Now we're going to take a side piece, we just pin that up, working around the seam line that we marked on the centre piece. And then we just pull it forward onto the face and start to mark where we want those transitions onto the face. See, Esther there marked the fur direction for the nap of the fur. When we're doing fur, we try not to allow fur to ever change direction by more than ideally 45 degrees relative to the next piece. Mark all the notes we need, some registration points. Pin it to another piece of fabric, then we're going to cut out two at once, and we'll pin them onto the head, see where we're going. See, we're just neatening out those curves, making the whole thing flow. Mark on the seam line for the unmarked centrepiece, just by eye, it's not too important exactly. Seam allowance is a seam allowance. As long as it matches the other side, we're fine. Again, Esther's just transferring the details from the front piece to the back piece. Copy your registration marks across. Then just pin it back on to the first piece, centerpiece, so we can see how the whole thing's starting to come together a bit more. This is really important to do both sides like this, because you might have pulled one side away from the center. So if you only do one half, you might find you've distorted the whole thing massively. At this point we can fix a lot of things with the successive pieces if we have distorted it. Now, just looking at the shoulders, it looked like we've pulled it a bit too high up. We've already put the throat piece in here. So we're just changing the line of where that fur is going to sew together onto the shoulders so it doesn't lift up so high. And we're just taking all those details, just arranging where we're cutting. Now the whole thing's in place. So we pin the line we want, and we just trim it off. And that looks a lot nicer, it sits onto the shoulder a lot more evenly than the one on the other side. Mark our notes on some more. Make sure we've got all the fur nap directions. Final cuts. We're going to use that to transfer onto the fur. So first of all, you get a piece of fur, mark on the nap, you'll see a big chalk arrow, and try and find a piece that allows you to maximise the use of your fur. I've got a long bit of fur offcut from somewhere, so we're just trying to work back onto that. Just mark around it with a bit of chalk. Add on a seam allowance where we need to glue it or sew it together. Then we take a razor blade and we just cut along from the back of the fur with a sharp razor blade, making sure we don't push too hard because we don't want to cut the fur pile, we just want to cut the backing. And we repeat this, chalking. Now if you notice I'm lifting up the edge in places, that's because the seam allowance I want is a lot smaller on the fur than the seam allowance we put on the fabric, because we were pinning and adjusting the fabric, and with the fur we're only going to use like a 6mm seam allowance because we use a tight zigzag stitch on the fur. So again, just cut your fur out with a sharp razor blade from the back, not too much pressure so you don't damage the nap of the fur pile on the front. If you see there's hardly any loose fur being sprayed and frayed around on the table, which is what you'd get using scissors. Now if you look there, you can see I'm arranging the pattern piece, keeping the arrow on the pattern in the direction of the fur nap. And just move it over. We're going to use the same pattern piece but on the other side, mark the nap on the back and just lay it into position. Chalk around the outside. Smaller seam allowance there. Mark those registration points. And then just cut out with a razor blade from the back. I think I'm using hair razors rather than shaving razors, they're just a bit longer. And there we go, now we're just going to quickly pin that all loosely in place onto the head, just so we can get an idea that we've got everything right and we haven't horribly messed up something and cut something backwards or inside out or whatever. So now we take our pieces off the head and we're going to pin them together. And to do that, you just make sure you put all the direction of the fur away from the pins, so there's nothing sticking out the seam. And we use quite a lot of pins to make sure that fur doesn't come forwards. You see I'm teasing it back through with my fingers. And just keeping that seam line neat and even. making sure we get the registration marks to match up and the ends to match up. Push the fur in, pin it along. Repeat that all the way along, even up each side to make everything work evenly and distribute any of the tension that's going to cause in the thickness of the fabric going around corners. Now we sew up the edge using a zigzag stitch right to the edge of the fabric. This means you aren't running a single line of thread to catch the fur pile. The zigzag allows the fur to remain freer, and it's just nice and tight to the edge. Ideally one end, the edge of the thing just go over the side, and there you go, we've got a fur hood. Thanks for watching, see you again next time.